"Thanks for the upgrade, my dear," Ethan said, flashing a grin that was all teeth and bravado as he sauntered into our living room. He tossed his sunglasses onto the coffee table with the air of someone who thought he owned the world, or at least this little slice of it. Every inch of him screamed self-satisfaction, from the tailored navy suit hugging his frame to the impossibly bright brand-new shoes he wore like a badge of honor. His luggage was a parade of high-end logos, the kind that made you feel underdressed just by standing next to them, and the luggage tags still hung off the handles, proof of his whirlwind first-class arrival from Europe. 5-star hotels, designer everything, the kind of excess he'd always raved about while scrolling through social media late at night, sighing over posts from people he insisted he could outshine if the world would just give him a shot. He looked at me, practically vibrating with excitement, eyes alight as if he'd finally stepped into the life he'd always believed was waiting for him just around the corner. "This is the kind of life I've been missing, Sarah," he said, as if I should be proud. I couldn't help it. I just burst out laughing, the sound bubbling up before I could stop it. Maybe it was the absurdity, maybe it was the relief, but in that moment, the whole performance looked so ridiculous I couldn't keep a straight face. He stopped in his tracks, frowning, his swagger faltering. "What's so funny?" he asked, voice edged with annoyance. "Oh, Ethan," I said, shaking my head, unable to wipe the smile off my face. "You have no idea what you've done. Let me back up a bit. My name is Sarah. I'm 34, I work in cybersecurity, and if you'd asked me yesterday, I'd have told you I was married to a charming disaster. 7 years I'd spent with Ethan, a walking red flag, wrapped up in a winning smile and endless charm. Ethan was always the dreamer, the storyteller, the man who could make selling sand in a desert sound like the opportunity of a lifetime. Me. I was the one who made sure the bills got paid, who steadied the ship while he bounced from one half-baked scheme to the next. I ignored the warning signs for years. The secrecy around money, the flurries of excitement that died as quickly as they began, the way he always had a reason for why he never quite had enough. I wanted to believe we were partners, building something together. I wanted to believe he was just waiting for his break. But deep down I knew better, and last week at 2 a.m., Ethan finally crossed the line in a way even he couldn't charm his way out of. I was upstairs, sound asleep, when he crept down to my laptop. He must have waited until he could hear my breathing slow and settle, waited for the moment I was most vulnerable. I'd always been vigilant. Paranoia is an occupational hazard in cybersecurity, but I never imagined I'd have to defend myself at home. That night, Ethan used my computer to access one of my credit cards. He copied down the details, snapped a few photos with his phone, and slipped back to bed like nothing happened, as if his secret would stay safe just because I loved him, or maybe because he thought he was too clever to be caught. The next morning I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through my phone when the alert started pinging. I opened my banking app and nearly dropped my mug. Almost $50,000 in charges. Designer boutiques, luxury watches, first-class flights to Paris. I felt a cold wave of nausea, but honestly I wasn't shocked. Ethan had always believed he was owed something bigger, something grand. Of course he did this. But here's the thing, I didn't panic. In fact I smiled. Because the card he'd used was a decoy. A dummy account tied to the fraud training program I ran at work. We used it to teach companies to spot and respond to financial crime. An account that flagged every transaction instantly, sending alerts straight to the authorities. Ethan had no idea. He just made himself a textbook case. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Chloe. "You're not going to believe this," I said, laying out every detail. She laughed so hard I had to wait for her to catch her breath. "Let me get this straight," she managed, wiping tears from her eyes. "He stole the training card. The one hardwired for fraud detection." "Exactly," I said, satisfaction warming my voice. "He thought he was being clever." "Clever," Chloe scoffed. "Every single charge is a red flag. Have the authorities called you yet?" "Not yet. But I'm sure it's only a matter of time." So I waited. I watched, silent and curious, as Ethan kept digging himself deeper. He must have convinced himself he'd gotten away with it. 2 days later I found a note on the counter. Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up. Translation. He was off spending my money, living the life he'd always talked about but never earned. Every night, new fraud alerts rolled in, Michelin-starred restaurants, penthouse suites, luxury shopping sprees. Each notification felt like a tiny victory, a reminder that this time Ethan's recklessness had consequences. 3 days into his little adventure, my phone rang. Agent Keller, a federal investigator, introduced himself in a voice that was all business. "We've identified significant fraudulent activity on your account," he said. "Do you know who could be responsible?" "Yes," I replied, no hesitation, no regret. "My husband." There was a long pause. "Your husband?" I told him everything, the dummy card, the training program. There was a low whistle on the other end of the line. "That's a new one," Agent Keller said. "You'll need to give a formal statement, but based on what we've seen, he's in deep trouble. This is federal, crossing borders, big-ticket items, identity theft. He's made it easy for us." By the time Ethan strutted back into the house, awash in new cologne and luxury, I was ready for him. He was still riding the high, oblivious to the inevitability bearing down on him. He waltzed into the living room, eyes gleaming, his arms loaded with expensive shopping bags, the weight of his own arrogance making him seem twice as large. "Thanks for the upgrade," he said, that old cocky grin back on his face. "You really outdid yourself this time." I couldn't hold back. I laughed, loud and unrestrained, right in his face. The sound rattled him. He frowned, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What's so funny?" he snapped, his confidence slipping like a mask. "Oh, Ethan," I said, shaking my head. "You're about to find out." He dropped his designer duffel on the floor, still wearing that smug look, as if the world still owed him something. "Seriously though, Sarah," he said, peeling off his jacket and tossing it onto the couch, "you should have told me about that card ages ago. Imagine the fun we could have had." I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, every inch of me radiating calm. "And how exactly did you think this would end?" He just shrugged, smirk never wavering, and kicked off his shoes. "You're always so uptight about money. It's not like you can't afford it. I figured you'd get over it once you saw how happy it made me." His audacity was almost impressive if it wasn't so pathetic. I watched him, seeing now the full extent of his self-delusion. Every word out of his mouth just dug him in deeper. He had always thought he was the exception, too smart to be caught, entitled to whatever he could grab. He never once stopped to think about the cost, to me, to us, or now to himself. So, the watches, the flights, the hotels. I let my words hang, watching the first flicker of uncertainty finally cross his face. For once, Ethan was at a loss for words. The silence between us crackled, heavy with the truth he was about to face. "You really thought all that was just a gift from me?" "Not a chance," I thought as he pointed at himself, grinning, radiating that old reckless charm I'd fallen for once. "It's about time you loosened up," he said, as if his mischief was a favor to me, as if I should be grateful to him for dragging chaos into my life. I managed a tight smile, the kind I'd perfected over the years, expressionless, unreadable, giving nothing away. "I'll bet," I thought. If only he knew how much I'd already changed. When Ethan disappeared into the shower, humming some awful tune that grated against my nerves, I moved quickly. I grabbed my phone, my hand steady for once, and texted Chloe. "He's back. Ready to move forward." My phone buzzed almost instantly. "Chloe, always ready. Perfect. I'll alert Agent Keller." For the past week, Chloe and Agent Keller had been piecing the case together, detail by detail, like assembling a jigsaw of betrayal. They tracked everything Ethan did, every charge, every booking, every careless move he made. Designer boutiques in Paris, where he'd spent money like he owned the world. Luxury hotels with views of the Seine, rooms he would never have gotten on his own. Each receipt, each digital footprint was a brick in the wall closing in around him. He made it so easy, strutting through life as if he were untouchable, as if the rules just didn't apply to him. He had no idea how deep he'd dug himself, how far out on a limb he'd gone, or how closely we were watching. Agent Keller had told me the fraud alerts from our dummy account had already triggered a full investigation. "We'll bring him in for questioning when you're ready," he'd said during our last call. His voice calm, methodical. But I'd let him walk into it himself. The more confident he feels, the better. He was right. Ethan's arrogance was his own undoing. He couldn't resist showing off. So, as Ethan's off-key singing rattled the bathroom walls, completely oblivious, something in me settled. 4 years, I'd let him take advantage of my trust, my willingness to believe the best of him, my stability that he counted on and exploited. Maybe I'd been naive, maybe just hopeful, but this time I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. This time, he was about to learn how it felt to be underestimated by someone who had finally woken up. When Ethan finally emerged, wrapped in a towel and grinning like a man who'd never known consequence, he flopped down on the couch, legs sprawled, completely at home. "You should have seen Paris," he said, rummaging in his bag and pulling out a shiny gold watch that practically screamed guilt. "The shops, the restaurants, it was like a dream. You would have loved it." "Sounds incredible," I said, leaning against the doorway, my posture casual but my mind racing. "Tell me more." He launched into a blow-by-blow of his week in Paris, waving his hands, painting pictures of champagne at rooftop bars, of dinners that lasted until dawn. He lingered on pointless details, embellishing every story, completely unaware that every word was a confession, that his bravado was a net tightening around him. He had no clue I was recording the entire conversation on my phone, my thumb steady on the screen, ready to send it all straight to Agent Keller. With every boast, he handed us another piece of evidence. "And the best part," Ethan said, holding up the watch, eyes glittering with pride, "nobody suspected a thing. Not even you." He said it like it was a joke, but it was really a declaration of how little he thought of me, how certain he was that I'd never catch on. The next morning I met Chloe for coffee, the air between us charged with anticipation. We sat in the corner, hunched over her laptop as she scrolled through the evidence. The fraud alerts, the charges, the recording from last night. It was all there, a tapestry of his deception. "He's got no defense," she said, her voice low and certain. "It's airtight. Keller's ready to bring him in. Local police are on board." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. For the first time, the reality of what I'd set in motion started to settle over me. A heaviness, but also a sense of freedom, the end of a chapter I'd been too afraid to close. "What happens after that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He'll face multiple charges. Fraud, identity theft, unauthorized use of a financial account," Chloe said, her tone clinical but not unkind. "With this much money involved, it's not just a slap on the wrist. Best case, he cuts a deal and avoids jail. Worst case, he's looking at years." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "Are you okay?" A small part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, to remember the Ethan who used to make me laugh, the one who once promised me the world. But then I remembered his smug grin, the way he flashed those stolen things as if the pain he caused didn't matter, as if I was just collateral damage in his pursuit of excitement. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of desperation. It was a pattern. Selfishness, entitlement, a refusal to take responsibility. I let it go on too long. That evening, Ethan lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of what was coming. I watched him over the rim of my glass, studying the set of his jaw, the careless way he tossed things aside, the easy confidence of someone who'd never been held accountable. Then came the knock at the door. Sharp, official, impossible to ignore. My heart hammered, but not with fear. It was anticipation, the sense that I was finally reclaiming something of myself. "Open the door." Agent Keller stood there, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. His expression calm but resolute. "Good evening, Miss Miller," he said. His tone polite but unmistakably in charge. "Is Ethan home?" "He's right inside," I said, stepping aside, my voice steady. "Come in." Ethan looked up, confusion flickering across his face as Keller and the officers entered. "What's going on?" he asked, sitting up, his bravado faltering. Agent Keller crossed the room with purpose. "Ethan Miller, you're under investigation for multiple counts of credit card fraud and unauthorized use of financial accounts. We'd like you to come with us for questioning." Ethan's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process what was happening. "What? No, this is a mistake." He turned to me, desperate, grasping at the last thread of his old manipulations. "Sarah, tell them this is crazy." I crossed my arms, tilting my head, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I don't know, Ethan. You've been pretty busy lately. Maybe you should explain it to them." As the officers read him his rights, Ethan started to protest, his voice rising with each word. "You can't do this, Sarah. This is a setup. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me." The words sounded hollow, as if repeating them could make them true, as if the rules he'd broken should somehow bend for him. I couldn't help myself. "Funny," I said, leaning in the doorway as they led him away. "I thought husbands weren't supposed to steal from their wives. Guess we're both learning something today." He glared at me, all his bravado stripped away, replaced by fear and fury. "You won't get away with this." I smiled, a real smile this time, one that belonged to me, not the mask I'd worn for years. "Oh, Ethan, I already have." The door shut with a sharp, final click. The living room felt huge and empty, echoes of his presence lingering in the air. I just stood there, staring at the space where he'd been minutes before, my heart racing, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment, the knowledge that I'd finally taken control. He was gone. Finally, truly gone. It didn't all feel triumphant. Not right away. There was grief in the silence, too, for the years wasted, for the trust broken, for the person I'd hoped he could be. But beneath that, there was something new. A quiet strength, a sense of possibility. I'd spent so long shrinking myself to fit the life Ethan wanted, to keep the peace, to pretend it was all okay. Now, for the first time, I let myself imagine something different. I thought of Chloe, of Agent Keller, of the people who'd stood by me while I found my footing again. I thought of the life I could build now, one where I didn't have to look over my shoulder or question my own instincts. As I closed the curtains on the night, I realized the emptiness in the room wasn't a loss. It was a beginning. The space he left behind was mine to fill, with anything or anyone I chose. And for the first time in years, I was ready to start over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. About an hour later, Chloe called me again, this time with Agent Keller patched in, his tone all business. "They've started questioning him," she said, voice steady but with a determined edge. "From what Keller's saying, Ethan's already trying to twist the story." Predictable. I rolled my eyes, the exhaustion bone deep. "Let me guess. He's painting himself as the victim." "Spot on," Chloe replied with a dry, almost bitter laugh. "He's telling them you gave him permission to use the card. But honestly, with the fraud alerts, the list of charges, and your recording, there's no way he's talking his way out of this." Hearing her say it aloud made it more real. For days, I'd been haunted by the idea that Ethan might wriggle out of this, that his charisma and easy lies would shield him from consequences yet again. But this time, the evidence was overwhelming. He'd left a trail even he couldn't disguise. The next morning, Agent Keller called back, his voice carrying a quiet satisfaction. "We've got everything we need," he said. "Your husband, sorry soon-to-be ex, admitted to using the card. He claims he didn't know it was linked to a fraud detection program, and now he's trying to shift the blame onto you. Says it was all a misunderstanding." I almost laughed at the predictability of it all. "Sounds about right," I said, sinking into my chair, feeling the tension begin to ease. "So what happens now?" "We're moving forward with the charges," Keller replied, matter of fact. "He's facing several counts of fraud and unauthorized use of a financial account. The amount involved makes it serious. He could be looking at significant penalties. The buyer protection program flagged his luxury purchases, so you'll be reimbursed for those. You aren't liable for a cent. Relief washed over me, so swift and complete I had to steady myself. For days I'd carried the burden of Ethan's actions, the fear that I'd wind up paying for his recklessness, literally and figuratively. But Keller's certainty was a bomb. For the first time since this nightmare began, I truly believed I'd won. "Thank you," I said, voice thick with gratitude. "Don't thank me," Keller replied. "Honestly, this one was handed to us. You did everything right. You were smart, thorough, and you kept your head. Not everyone does." The fallout for Ethan was brutal, more so than I'd dared hope. Word of his arrest spread quickly through our circle of friends and acquaintances. The persona he'd so carefully built, the image of the charming, spontaneous husband, started to unravel almost overnight. Nicole, the woman I'd long suspected was more than a friend, dropped him the moment she heard about the charges. The designer goods he'd been so eager to show off were confiscated by the authorities. The extravagant flights he'd booked, cancelled. The banks, alerted to his fraud, froze his accounts without hesitation. It was as if his whole world collapsed in a matter of days. The man who had always landed on his feet suddenly had nowhere to stand. One evening, a call came in from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Sure enough, it was Ethan. His voice was low, drained of its usual bravado, the desperation unmistakable. "Sarah," he began, hesitating. I need to talk to you." I let out a short, sharp laugh, unable to hide my disbelief at his nerve. "Ethan, the only thing you need to do is figure out what you're going to say to the judge." "Please," he said, his composure cracking. "I messed up, okay? I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was just what?" Cut in, my voice icy. "Just trying to steal $50,000 from me? Just hoping I wouldn't notice. Or maybe you thought I'd be too blind, too loyal, too forgiving to stop you." He fell silent. The pause stretched on, heavy with regret. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, almost childlike. "I thought you loved me." I closed my eyes, anger and sadness tangled together. "I did, Ethan. I loved the person I thought you were. But the man who stole from me lied to me and thought he could get away with it. That's not someone I could ever love." I ended the call before he could reply, the finality of it ringing in my ears. A week later, Chloe called with an update. "Ethan took a plea deal," she said. "He's avoiding jail, but he has to pay back every cent, and there's community service too. His credit is trashed for years." "That sounds about right," I said, a wry smile tugging at my lips. "He always wanted the high life. Now he gets to see how the other half lives." Chloe chuckled. "You're handling this better than anyone I know would." "It's funny," I mused, glancing around the apartment that finally felt like mine. For so long, I thought Ethan was the glue holding us together. His charm, his confidence, his endless ideas. I thought those were what kept us afloat. But now I see the truth. I was the foundation. I was the one keeping everything from falling apart. He was just extra weight I didn't need. The day the divorce papers came through, I celebrated quietly. I poured myself a glass of wine and stretched out on the couch, savoring the simple peace of my own company. The apartment glowed with a new kind of lightness. Ethan's presence had always cast a shadow, filling every room with tension and uncertainty. Now, for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. As I sipped my wine, I replayed that moment when he'd come home, arrogant and proud, flaunting his new designer goods as if they were trophies. He'd been so sure of his own cleverness, so certain he could outsmart everyone, including me. Now, he was the one suffering the consequences of his actions, stripped of the trappings he'd valued more than our marriage. Freedom tasted nothing like I expected. It was quieter, softer. The absence of drama, of suspicion, of fear. It was a gift, one I hadn't realized I'd been craving for years. It wasn't just the end of a toxic marriage. It was the beginning of something entirely new. A life that belonged to me. In the days after Ethan's arrest, the apartment was almost unnaturally quiet. His things were gone. What little hadn't been sold off or hastily stuffed into that designer duffel bag. But the emptiness felt like a blessing. Every room seemed brighter, every corner free from the heaviness his secrets had left behind. I could finally sit in my own living room and feel at peace, no longer haunted by the uncertainty of what betrayal might be lurking next. Chloe came by one afternoon, a stack of final paperwork in hand. She settled onto the couch with her familiar no-nonsense energy, and I handed her a cup of coffee, grateful for her steady presence. "How are you holding up?" she asked, searching my face for any cracks in my composure. "Better than I thought I would," I admitted, the truth surprising even me. "It's strange. I'm not even angry anymore. Just relieved. Lighter." She smiled, a knowing, gentle curve of her lips. "That's how you know you're really free." As she left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. For the first time in years, my future felt wide open, unclouded by anyone else's lies or ambitions. I had lost a husband, yes. But what I gained was far greater. A life that was finally, wonderfully, entirely my own. "You've already won, you know. It's not just that you survived all this, Sarah. You came out stronger on the other side." I kept thinking about that as we waded through the mountain of paperwork, hammering out the details of Ethan's financial restitution, every line item a reminder of what I was owed. Not just money, but the time, the trust, the years I couldn't get back. Sure, watching the lawyer force him to agree to pay back every cent he stole was satisfying, but it was more than vengeance or even justice. This was about taking back my independence piece by piece, reclaiming the parts of myself I'd let slip away. For years, I let Ethan call the shots. I told myself it was easier to just keep the peace, to let the little things slide. The way he dismissed my ideas, the way he made decisions without even asking. At the time, I thought it was compromise, the kind you made in a marriage. Now I see it for what it was. A peace built on silence, on swallowing my needs over and over. That isn't peace at all. It's a slow erasure. A week after the final mediation, the official divorce papers came, tucked inside a plain envelope that felt absurdly small for the weight it carried. I remember standing in the hallway, the afternoon sun coming in through the window, just staring at it. I held onto that envelope for a long minute, as if I was holding the sum of all the choices that led me here. Then I ripped it open, hands shaking, heart pounding. I skimmed past the legalese, looking for the words that actually mattered. Finalized and irrevocable. There it was. The end, but also the beginning. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter crumpled in my hand, and let myself just breathe. This wasn't the life I pictured when I married Ethan. Back then, I dreamed of stability, of a partner who'd stand beside me, of a home built on trust and laughter and the kind of love that grows deeper with time. Instead, I'd built this life for myself, brick by brick, after everything crumbled. I looked around at the apartment, my apartment now, and realized I'd found something better than the illusion I'd been chasing. Freedom, clarity, and the proof that I was far stronger than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. That night, Lauren showed up at my door, arms full. My favorite takeout, a bottle of wine, and a hug that said everything words couldn't. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass, eyes sparkling. "And to the absolute dumpster fire you just walked away from." I laughed, a real deep laugh I hadn't felt in so long, and clinked my glass against hers. "To never settling for less than I deserve." The words felt powerful, like a promise to myself. The weeks that followed felt like waking up after a long, uneasy sleep. I started piecing together what my new life could be, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. I redecorated the apartment, choosing bold colors I'd always loved but never dared to pick before. Blues and yellows, art on the walls, flowers on the windowsill. Every small change was an act of self-assertion. I finally booked that solo vacation I'd been dreaming about for years. Just me, a suitcase, and the open coast. I walked along the beach at sunrise, the salty wind in my hair, and felt a kind of peace I'd never known. A peace that came not from avoiding conflict, but from finally letting go. Ethan tried to reach out, of course. Mutual friends relayed his attempts, and then came the emails. A half-hearted apology, a letter full of empty promises about how he'd changed. The words rang hollow. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He'd made his choices over and over, and now I was making mine. Every so often I'd hear about Ethan through the grapevine, how he was struggling to find work, the fraud charges dogging him, how he'd moved back in with his parents. He was still spinning stories, still convinced he could charm his way out of anything. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. If anything, I felt relieved. His problems were no longer my burden to carry. A month later, I found myself standing by the living room window, morning coffee in hand, watching the city come alive. Sunlight streamed through the fresh blue paint I'd chosen, turning the room bright and hopeful. The space felt transformed, not just redecorated but reclaimed. It no longer felt like a battleground, haunted by arguments and silence. Felt like home. My home. For the first time I could see a future stretching out in front of me, wide open and full of possibility. I thought about the journey, how I'd spent years believing in the promise of marriage, clinging to the hope that things would get better if I just tried harder, loved harder. I'd ignored my intuition, the quiet, persistent voice warning me that something was wrong, that Ethan's charm was just a mask for deeper selfishness. Now I finally understood. Walking away wasn't defeat. It was courage. It was choosing myself. That weekend, Lauren and I met for brunch. A new ritual, a celebration of freedom and friendship. Over mimosas and waffles, she grinned at me. "So, what's next for you?" I smiled, a quiet excitement growing in my chest. "Honestly, I'm focusing on myself. Work's going well, and I've been thinking about taking a real vacation. Maybe up in the mountains, somewhere quiet where I can just be." She raised her glass. "That's what I like to hear. You deserve every bit of it." For the first time in years, every decision I made was just for me. No more compromises. No more shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. I started signing up for classes, exploring new hobbies, making plans on a whim. I learned to trust my instincts again, to listen to what I wanted instead of what someone else needed from me. Freedom became something tangible, a daily practice, not just an idea. Sometimes I still heard about Ethan. Another dead-end job, another failed scheme, the weight of debts he couldn't escape. The designer suits were gone, the flashy vacations a distant memory. He was stuck with the consequences of his own choices, living in a world that no longer revolved around him. I didn't waste time thinking about him. He was a chapter I'd finished, a lesson learned. The last time Ethan reached out, it was a long, rambling email, full of apologies that sounded more like excuses than real remorse. I read the first few lines, then closed my laptop and deleted it without a second thought. I didn't need closure from him. I'd already found it within myself. One evening, I sat out on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker below. I thought about all I'd been through. The lies, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights spent questioning everything. It had been a hard road, a painful one, but it led me here, stronger, wiser, and wholly myself. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't bitter. If anything, I felt a strange kind of gratitude. Ethan's betrayal had pushed me to face my own strength, to stop shrinking, to trust my own voice. I'd learned to value my independence, to embrace uncertainty, and to appreciate the quiet joy of living on my own terms. I know now that walking away wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything. I learned to trust my instincts, to stand firmly in my own choices, and to reclaim the freedom I'd let slip away. No longer would I allow someone else to chart the course of my life or diminish my sense of self. The city lights stretched endlessly before me, each one a promise of possibility, their shimmer reflecting in my glass as I raised it high. "Here's to me," I murmured, voice steady and sure. "Here's to fresh starts, to forging my own path." For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I let the memories of Ethan drift away, their weight finally lifting as I closed that chapter for good. I wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. Instead, I felt a quiet thrill at the prospect of new beginnings, ready to embrace whatever adventures and challenges awaited on the horizon.